after Door County's first settlers cleared the land for its timber, they discovered that the soil wasn't suitable for most crops. But in 1862, Swiss immigrant Joseph Zettel planted the first orchard in Door County. It was an apple orchard, and it flourished. 30 years later, Door County's ideal fruit growing conditions caught the attention of other Wisconsin fruit growers and the University of Wisconsin's Horticulture Department. Their trials in growing fruit in the county included experiments with apples, plums, and pears. But their ultimate success was proven in 1896 when 3 acres of tart cherries were planted. It exceeded their expectations, and within 50 years, Door County would annually harvest 10% of all cherries grown in the United States.
For farming, this isn't the best soil. It's all rocky. And the biggest reason they're growing up here in Door County is we have the longest frost-free period. It takes forever for spring to get to Door County.
With water on 3 sides of us here, really helps to hold the crop back in the spring. And then as it develops, the water can kind of cushion those big drops in temperature in April and May that may have a damaging effect on the crop.
And in a lot of ways, the cherry tree is a really delicate tree, but it grows in this soil that is impossible to grow anything else in. And it's an amazing thing that there's this sort of delicate tree that is also really strong and really resourceful.
By 1919, Door County orchards were producing more cherries than it could sell as fresh fruit. The solution was to convert an old pea canning plant into what would then be the world's largest cherry canning plant. Door County cherries became nationally known as growers began shipping their product to markets across the country. Over the next 10 years, Door County cherry orchards would continue to expand, but the Great Depression was threatening to slow that growth. In 1929, orchard owner Carl Reynolds came up with the idea to promote Door County cherries through the creation of a week-long Cherry Blossom Festival, which earned national media coverage. The festival spanned the entire county, with parades in each village that would attract thousands of tourists.
The cherry industry back in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, at some point they were doing such a really good job of marketing that they kind of built this concept that the cherries were a very colorful, very inviting kind of crop, that you could go out and you could pick these cherries, you could see the cherry blossoms. They just did a really great job of marketing.
A couple of the top largest orchards in the world were in Door County, and so where there was over 1,000-acre orchard in Sturgeon Bay in the late 1940s, and that took a lot of hand labor to harvest, and the 1940s were probably the heyday where there was over 10,000 acres of Montmorency and early Richmond cherries grown in Door County.
The story of Horseshoe Bay Farms begins with the formation of a company, interestingly enough, called United Fruit Growers. They planted a small amount of orchards, but I think the name United Fruit Growers was more a cover for what their real mission was, which was to create a development. Unfortunately, they were probably a few decades ahead of their time, and the development and golf course did not come to fruition. And one of the investors took all of the property. His name was Frank Murphy. He starts by building about 9 farm buildings and 5 farmhouses in about 2 years, and it was a state-of-the-art farm at the time. And his principal first initiative was to create a Holstein breeding operation, one of the best in the Midwest. And it really got off to a great start, was a money maker for about 5 years. And then they had an unbelievable tragedy. Several of the cows contracted Bang's disease, which back then, which was about 1925, was incurable. And it spread to about 70% of the herd, and they had to put almost all of the herd down. So they were wiped out. And they had about 100 acres started of orchards up on the bluff. But at this point, he had to walk away from the Holstein breeding operation and concentrate exclusively on orchard farming up on the bluff, and eventually planted over 600 acres of various cherry and apple trees. They became one of the largest fruit producers in Door County, and for about 2 decades were the largest seasonal employer in Door County as well.
Harvesting cherries was traditionally a labor-intensive activity. At first, local pickers kept up with the harvest, but as the demand grew, extra help was needed. Orchard owners recruited teenagers and families from across the state to pick, and migrants from Mexico, the Bahamas, and Jamaica brought the total number of orchard laborers to over 10,000 per season.
From as far away as Chicago, but certainly from throughout the state, they would gather 100 to 110 kids here. The kids were required to pick 7.5 pails minimum a day for their room and board. Everything above that was cash in their pockets, and the kids who really hustled could make up to $50 a week, which back in the 40s and 50s, when most of this was going on, was a lot of money for a teenage kid. How do you attract 110 teenagers every year? Well, Frank Murphy and the next owner of the farm, his son-in-law, Dr. Robert Coles, both sat on the board of directors of the Green Bay Packers. And back in the day, the Green Bay Packers didn't make enough money to take them through the year. So Dr. Robert Coles and Frank got a couple of the star Green Bay Packers to come up here and be camp counselors. And that was a huge attraction for these kids over any other option they had up here in Door County.
Now, this building was built to house migrants. It was built in 1940. So it was built actually before World War II even started. That's back in the day when we were the biggest cherry producer in the United States. And like I say, with all the cherries having to be picked by hand, it took thousands of them. I'd almost say most of them were Latino families from Texas, Mexico. We also got blacks from Missouri and Arkansas. We got Native Americans. You got young people out of cities. They'd advertise in the papers in Milwaukee and Green Bay.
In the 1940s, there was a huge shortage of labor in the U.S. because of everyone fighting overseas. And at the same time, there was a big shortage of labor coming from the South, which was the normal source of migrant workers north. In 1945, 2,000 German prisoners of war came to Door County and picked cherries for just one harvest season. U.S. Navy ships that had brought American soldiers over to Europe, and on those empty Navy ships they put German prisoners of war, brought them back over to the U.S., and they spread them out throughout the U.S. to work on different agricultural projects.
They were just normal, ordinary guys. They didn't want to be in the military in the first place, captured in North Africa. So now they're here working in Door County, 3 meals a day, not getting shot at, nice and cool in the evenings, and what more could you ask for?
The 1950s and 60s saw a decline in Door County's cherry orchards. Orchards in Michigan were getting larger and more productive. Baking cherry pies became a lost art as women joined the workforce. And the cost of labor rose to the point where hand-picking cherries was no longer profitable.
By 1940, we were the largest in the United States, up until the 50s. Back when we were the largest here in Door County, they'd put out maybe 60 or 70 million pounds. Nowadays, I think last year was 13 million.
Harvest is the big time for us, of bringing in everybody to do the harvest, and that's changed a lot in the last 100 years, where that was all hand harvest in the 40s and 50s, and then mechanical shaker came along in the 1960s. First started shaking just individual limbs, and then now we shake the whole tree at the trunk or the base, and that's much less people than it used to be, and much faster, much more efficient, and that's a major change from the way it was all done in the 1940s. The timeline of a harvest on a normal harvest day would be our machines usually are going out about 4 in the morning and start to harvest. We're right now operating 3 machines that probably are harvesting about a total of 10 trees a minute. And so it takes us, not that long to shake an acre of fruit. But that gets transported to the processing plant. We try to do that very quickly so that fruit is a limited amount of time from the time it's harvested till it's in the freezer. So it will get transported to Egg Harbor to our plant there, and it'll be cooled with ice cold water to get that fruit cold enough so that you can run a 5-star needle through the middle of that cherry without crushing it to remove the pit. And the other things that happen in that facility are laser sorting and to sort out any bruising or issues in the fruit, and then is packaged in whatever packages that our customer is looking for. So that process really only takes from the time the tree is harvested till it gets to the freezer is really only about 6 or 8 hours. There's been a large evolution in the utilization of the fruit from 60 years ago to today. It was, in the early days, there was a lot more of canning, and today juices and dehydrated fruit is a much bigger part of the market today than it was.
Door County is always known for pie fill and those kind of products. And now the main products in the cherry industry are dried cherries and juices. There's been a lot of work done by Michigan University, and found out that the health benefits are unbelievable for all ages. And so cherry juice, easily drinkable, dried cherries, carry them along with you, has really opened up avenues for the cherry industry.
There's still a vibrant industry that's here, and we're just happy to be a part of it.
Door County is such a name that's recognized, and cherries have just been associated with it since those early days, the 40s, the 50s, the 60s. And so when they come up here, they really kind of expect, most of them, to see orchards and to see cherry blossoms and to be able to stop at roadside stands and to be able to go into a restaurant and have cherry pies and to have all those products. It's just part of Door County. And it happened over many, many years. And so at this point, trying to hang on to that culture of the impact that cherry has on Door County is really important, because I think it brings to people an opportunity to experience, some of the past history, but also some of the future.